Welcome back to another episode of Just
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
looking
looking
for a
for
nut,
a
for a
nut,
nut,
trying to
trying
trying
get out of
to
get out of
this
his
this
rut.
rut. Okay, that was
All
scary.
right.
That
Yeah,
was.
that was.
We did that on
Hey,
purpose.
hey, a new person in the equation, new person setting the rhythm. So
I'll take the
there's
blame.
there's much
Yeah,
to be
because
learned there.
I don't like taking accountability for my own actions. I like blaming Trip for everything.
That's 100% me. It's Oleg's signal. That's what it was.
Now, we're going to be talking a lot about horror tonight. Speaking of Trip, who is almost as big of a horror fan as me. Maybe he's even a bigger one. But before we get into all that, I just wanted to tell a little story for a second. When I was a kid, there was a mini series on TV, and it was an adaptation of Stephen King's vampire novel, Salem's Lot. Okay. There was a scene in there where there were these two brothers, one of whom had gone missing. And the brother that wasn't missing was sleeping peacefully in his bedroom. And he woke up in the middle of the night and he looked out the window, and in the mist, his missing brother was floating. By the way, he was on the second floor. His missing brother was floating at the window in this mist, scratching on the window, up and down, scratching. And the boy walks over to his window like that. He can't help it. He's hypnotized by his brother, and he opens the window, and then the brother comes in and vampire bites him on the neck. Next thing you know, the surviving brother is in a coffin attacking people. That scared me. That scared me. Okay. Now, it wasn't so bad that I had to start wearing diapers, but it was pretty close. And I won't lie, every night when I went to bed, I slept under a window, and I looked up and I was so scared that some boy was going to be in his pajamas, scratching at my window in the mist, ready to bite me. I was too young to die. Why did that scare me? Tell Oleg, I'm turning it over to you.
So I've had similar fears, maybe not as intense as what you just described, Scott, but I've had fears when it comes to Freddy Krueger, and that is I remember the very first time when I watched that when I was really young, I was terrified of going to bed afterwards, and I don't know why I would actually sit through the whole movie watching the entire thing, only to know later on that I wouldn't be able to go to bed because I feel like Freddy's outside my window, ready to go, come in once the lights turns off. And the other thing that I always found interesting is that my parents' house would live by a set of railroad tracks. And so whenever a train would pass at night, I used to always think that Freddy was coming. And the other part to this story, and this is not like 1 to 2 day to maybe a week. This was like multi-year experience I went through. The other part to that story that I found scary is that after watching films like that, I don't know if the two of you can relate, or Kim or anyone else that's tuning in, but the monster under your bed.
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, for me that monster was in a closet. And the craziest part of it all is that the closet looked directly at my bed. And one of the things I used to always do, and I not always, but quite often, is I had this stick from a broom in my room, and I would put it through the closet door, just so I would have that extra second in case someone opens it or I hear a noise. And yeah, but those things really bothered me, and there are certain books that I know when I was younger I just wouldn't even I wouldn't even know. You couldn't pay me whatever to read a book. You can pay me to or watch those films like Friday the 13th. I can't tell you how long it took me to really watch the film and understand that, okay, this is a film, this is not actual reality that I may experience. But I was just so convinced that that might happen to me, and that might be the reality that I go through in my life.
We're going to talk about this. I know you've got a lot to say, Trip, but I'm going to just interrupt and acknowledge. Kim, you haven't been here a little while. Welcome home. I know you've been mega busy at work. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to know you were watching Salem's Lot right along with me. We were probably watching the same night. And Lance Kerwin. A lot of people had a crush on Lance Kerwin. I wish I was Lance Kerwin.
I don't even
That
know
many
who
people
that
had
is.
well, I don't think many people have a crush on him anymore, but I'm sure he's happily married. Anyway, he was the young hero ingenue who was terrorized, and I don't remember if he survived to the end or not. I believe he did. And then David Soul, who was in Starsky and Hutch, was also in that. And David Soul, Lance Kerwin was Oleg sexy, and David Soul was Kurt Bodenheimer sexy.
Take it.
Now, now, before we get into that, I just had to address this whole Freddy Krueger thing. I love that movie, but one thing that makes movies less scary for me is if there's something that's patently ridiculous in it or that takes it out of the movie. And for anyone that's seen the original Friday the 13th, and I dare either of you all to challenge me, or Kim, I bet you've seen, it's not Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. Kim, have you seen Nightmare on Elm Street too? I know that you will probably secretly agree with me too. Whoever it was that played that mother, it was like a horror movie with naturalistic acting and great special effects, and then a drag queen.
Oh, the alcoholic
suddenly in
mother.
there. The alcohol.
Yeah.
I felt like it was like Joan Crawford suddenly appearing in a movie. And so that made it less scary. She was so. I remember there was like this scene where she shuts the door and she throws her whole shoulder in it, and it was just, it was so over the top acting, like something from the 1940s, that it took me out of the suspension of belief. Otherwise, I was scared when Freddy's fingers were growing and chasing that poor girl down, all of that. So when it comes to terror, I need to not have that sense of terror broken. Otherwise, I don't feel scared anymore. Now, with that little important remark having been made, Trip, I know you've got so much to talk about. So talk.
Well, my first thing, Oleg, it was kind of interesting between the closet with the bit. It's like Monsters Inc. and Freddy. That's who scares you. But no, for me, it almost plays off of what Scott just said. That rational versus irrational. I could watch Critters, Nightmare on Elm Street, any of this amazing stuff I have behind me. I could watch any of those, and there was that little sense of, I don't think this could really happen. The things that would scare me growing up, and Scott, we talked about this last week, unsolved mysteries. Robert Stack walking around with that coat and like an empty, dark courtroom lobby, and then the music playing and the opening sequence. As a kid, that scared me to death. And there were some episodes where, it's like, this person is yet to be found. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're in Lumberton, North Carolina, running through my neighborhood. Anyway, that would scare me and keep me from sleeping as a kid. And then the other thing was, y'all remember Tales from the Crypt?
Of course.
There was an episode where a guy falls off of a cliff and his neck snapped and he had the bones sticking out right here. That terrified me as a kid to where I quit sleeping on the top bunk. I moved to the bottom bunk because it just absolutely terrified me. So, yeah. And still to this day, I could watch something like that and I'm like, oh my gosh, that could really happen to me. So that sense of that could happen absolutely terrifies me.
And the drag queen mother, I guess, just really can't happen.
She's a little over the top for me. Yeah.
Now, Kim Schultz, I've loved you for 40 years, even though we both haven't even hit 30 yet. But I just loved you a little bit more right now because of this comment you put up at 7:28, I think, about this movie. Oh, the one before that. Oh, sorry about that. Yes. Okay. I was actually talking to Trip about that just last week. I think it was called Mysterious Monsters. And Kim, you may be the only other person I've known who saw that movie. I remember that scene. The woman's name was Rita Graham. Bigfoot comes through and grabs her through that scared me forever. And then her husband comes down with the gun and he opens the door and there's Bigfoot standing there with his yellow eyes in his face. I did a Toastmasters contest speech about that. They hated it because I think the subject matter, Bigfoot and people getting attacked and shooting guns and monsters smashing through windows. Toastmasters doesn't go for that.
Hey, you got to know your audience.
Yeah, you've got to read the audience.
Yeah, you got to read the audience.
I love that you know that movie. I love you. I love you. I love you. Kim says, yes, it was scare was. Okay. I've gone off again.
Did either of you experience this, or Kim or anyone else that's tuning in, where So when I was younger and I had this phase for a pretty uh, extended period of time, and that is when my parents would leave the house to go to like dinner or hang out with their friends or wherever, and I was in charge of the house. And even with having two dogs in the house,
Mm.
I was still the type of person who would go upstairs in my bedroom, lock the door, turn all of the lights on in the house, and literally sit there terrified that no one rings the doorbell. And a couple of the times when people would ring the doorbell, I mean, I could, it was indescribable. Like I would sit in there, and I find it funny how Kim even mentioned the closet in one of her comments. I literally did that. I kid you not. I don't remember what age, but I would put myself in the closet. I would lock the doors, and I would just sit there, like hoping that it's not someone who's just gonna, walk through the night. And I wonder if part of that has to do, and this is a question that I was gonna actually ask all of you as you were talking about this, is where do you think this thought of why me really comes from? Like you watch a movie. I mean, I love watching Home Alone, but at
That's
the
what I was
same
thinking when
time,
you said that.
I experienced the same exact thought that like I could be next. My house could be next as far as broken into, robbed, and blah blah blah. But I really get interested as far as like, okay, these people are filming this film in New York or wherever, right? Like far, far away from me. What are the chances that it actually happens to me? And so I'm really curious, like, why is there this natural tendency to think that you're next in line? Even with Criminal Minds, watching a Criminal Minds episode of person getting murdered in New Zealand, and I'm literally halfway across the globe. Like it would take the other person a really long time to get to my house,
Or
and yet I
unsolved
still have,
mysteries, right?
yeah, and I still have that tendency to think that like somehow I'm the next person in line. Not
I
even
think,
third or fourth, but literally second in line.
yeah, I think for me it was it all, this whole thing for me goes back to unsolved mysteries, because even now it's funny because now if you turn on one and watch it, it's like, it's took place in Charleston, South Carolina. It took place in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and it's always like right up the road from where you're watching it. My wife and I are always like, "Wow, North Carolina again." So I think that was what did it for me, was that I always heard all these stories, and it was happening right around the same area where I was living in. And yet Home Alone, I thought you were going to talk about the little furnace downstairs that was freaking them out. But I remember the same feeling. I remember my parents, I would be sick for a day and my parents had to go to work, and all of a sudden like the floor creaks in a weird way, and you freak out, and then you go lock yourself in a room. Although I was the one that would die in a horror movie because I would go explore where the creak came from.
Oh, I wondered who these people were. I guess it's you.
No.
Yeah, and I still knock on them when I watch a movie. I'm like, "What are you doing, you idiot? Don't go hunt down."
No.
But I was that person. I was the one who would go in and I would like grab the doorknob and turn it real slow. And in a slasher film, I'm done. But yeah, I was just curious. I guess that curiosity of the dark side, I guess, kind of always kind of intrigued me.
Yeah, there's no way you're gonna find me finding that creek. And the other thing is this, and I hope my parents can forgive me for this. There were a couple of times when they would leave to go to dinner or somewhere, and they would ask me to do laundry. No way am I going in the basement and starting the laundry down another set of stairs. And our basement is also set up in a way that when you go down the set of stairs, there's a sliding door, and it's glass, so you could see into the woods, into the side of the backyard.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, I'm doing this laundry when you guys get back, or I'm starting the laundry right before you guys leave, but there's no way I'm starting this laundry and I'm going back down to pick it up while you guys are gone. Absolutely not.
Okay. I've got to butt in here for a number of reasons. First of all, I've got to say hi to homie Gabe Leal. Gabe, for the past 2 weeks, has actually given a shout out to this episode on LinkedIn. Gabe has a massive audience. I appreciate you, Gabe. We all appreciate you. You are, as I mentioned in my comment to you today, a leader in the LinkedIn Live community.
Mm-hmm.
It's an honor to be given a shout out by someone like you, and it is great to have you in this audience. Please know the depth of our appreciation. Secondly, Gabe, I like that you like the suspenders, homie. If you ever want tips on how to rock it, you and I will do a special LinkedIn Live just on rocking some suspenders. I know you'll look good in it. One of us looks good, and that's you. So we'll do a whole thing about that. We'll change people's lives through leather suspenders. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about Kim Schultz here for a minute. So Kim may relate to something that I had a fear of because she and I were watching the same things in Topeka, Kansas. One thing that I was watching on TV was this stuff about the rapture, the Christian apocalypse, the fundamentalist Christian apocalypse. And I think I mentioned this before. There was this show where this girl who didn't have the appropriate religious beliefs woke up one day and her whole family had been raptured and Armageddon was there. And she was 70, so she had like the feathered hair and the bell bottoms and all, and she was petulant too. And she refused. She knew that the rapture had come and Jesus had taken away all of the good Christians, and she as a non-believer was left behind to suffer the plagues of the tribulation. And she knew that the beast, the Antichrist, was going to put 666 on your forehead and your hands, and she refused to do that, so she ended up in jail. And at the end of the movie, they threw her down under a guillotine, and the last shot was a knife coming down on her head. That scared me when I woke up one day and my whole family was gone. They'd just gone to the grocery store. But I didn't know that because I'd been taking a nap. I thought the rapture would come and I'd been left behind. I knew that I was going to end
believing.
I was going to end up on a guillotine because I wasn't going to take the mark of the beast. That scared me. Gabe, if you can relate, and Kim, if you can relate, and Gabe, yes, thank you. Podcast on leather suspenders. I'm marking it in the calendar. So all of that seemed like it was real. So Kim, I'm asking you if you saw that too, and if it scared you, if that's how you ended up with blonde hair because he ended up so scared. And then I will also say that Kim points something else out, which is that she is an empath. And empaths or however you pronounce it are more likely to, I would imagine, feel frightened by these things because going back to your question, Oleg, you could see yourself in the shoes of someone in that situation. Now, I never see myself in the shoes of the victim. I see myself in the shoes of someone being attacked, fighting. I see myself as a victim. You know, I was telling someone this recently, maybe it was Trip too. I'll be the last one to die. But I don't see myself in the villain, really, thank goodness. But maybe that's why. Maybe it's because somehow these movies are triggering empathy. We can relate to the characters that are suffering or that are being terrorized so much that you can't help but think it's going to be you next.
Yeah.
Oleg, you brought up something talking about the glass windows, you know, like going to do your laundry. Have y'all seen the movie Hush?
No.
Yes.
Hush is one of those things where you're like, you really empathize with the character, like what they're going through. She's deaf. She's in her house. I think she's like on her laptop, but someone is basically like standing right outside of her window, killing somebody within, I mean, she can see it if she turns her head. And then they get into the house and start stalking her. And you really feel for this character the whole way through. And it is draining watching it, because the rush of adrenaline you have watching it, the dopamines that, I mean, just everything that's running through your body when you're watching this, it really pulls you in and it zaps you. By the time you're done, I mean, I can kind of relate to what Kim said, you know, drained of your energy, puts you in a dark place. I mean, and you know it's not real, but you suspend that belief for just a little bit and for 2 hours watching it. But Hush did a remarkable job of doing so, and it got a good Rotten Tomato score too. So,
well,
go ahead, Oleg.
I think it also just brings up an interesting point then, and it's in regard to the whole concept of reality. I mean, how real is real at the end of the day? If I'm able to watch a movie in which I know that through certain scenes, and I'm sure that two of you can relate, and Gabe and Kim, where we've seen movies and you just see the person's, you know, guts come out and like all these intestines. It's like, okay,
squirting.
Like, yeah, is that like really possible? Like, you know, you really have to go through a lot to make that happen to a human being. But I realized that I think what's been interesting for me is why I find myself, why do I get sucked into some of these films that are completely unrealistic.
Like The Exorcist or something like that, you mean?
Yeah, like things like that. And I think what I realize is that it's sometimes for me, it's very difficult to draw the difference between what is real and what is not. And I think when you mix the realities, or when I mix the realities between what I'm actually experiencing in the physical world around me, and also what I see through, let's say, someone else's lens or even imaginary lens, it becomes very difficult to contrast. Like, okay, can that really happen? Can it not? And that's where I think, like, for me, that connection happens, and why I feel films such as Freddy Krueger to be so real is because I get so sucked into it and connected to the story and the character, where it becomes very difficult to break away in the moment and say, okay, that's not the actual reality I experienced. That's a different form of reality that's taking place.
Well, but the power of the Freddy Krueger movies is that
Yeah.
they take place in nightmares.
Yep.
And
That's
so
true.
really they're actually quite realistic in that they are, yes, the circumstances are fantastical.
Relatable.
If you're
The
right, but
relatability.
right, dreams don't make sense. And when you're in them, they feel real. And so that it was playing on that. And so it goes as to a question that I have about quote unquote realistic horror versus something that's fantastical and the spectrum in between. Halloween, Friday the 13th, those to me are still kind of realistic. Yes, there aren't serial killers out there that you kill and then they just keep rising over and over like Michael Myers, but the situation that the characters are in at least has the possibility of being realistic. That's like, let's describe that as the middle of the spectrum. Then there are situations like Jaws, okay, like that scene with the swimmer at the beginning. That could happen, but weirdly enough, I don't find that particularly scary. Now I feel empathy for her when I'm watching it. It's genuinely horrifying and it's upsetting, and obviously it kept people out of water for decades. But it's one experience of terror or horror or scariness that to me is less intense than, for instance, The Exorcist, which I mentioned earlier. That scared me. Like those little scenes where you see the demon unveiling its face.
The stairwell.
The stairwell when she's crawling back. It's odd because to me, demonic possession is not the most realistic scenario in the world, especially turning your head around and vomiting pea soup and levitating in the air. Like that's come on. And so I don't find it as realistic as Jaws, but there's something ominous. I don't even know that I really believe. I don't know. To me, the existence of demons, I'm highly skeptical of, let alone that the best thing an all-powerful demon would have to do is possess some 12-year-old girl. And why not possess the Queen of England or something, someone with some real power? And so I feel like but that nevertheless, I couldn't sleep for days after I saw that.
Suspension of disbelief. And that's one thing about movies, is they can get us drawn. But I do have a question, curious to see what y'all think. I just went to Universal Horror Nights last week, and I was so excited going to it, knowing I'm going to be going through haunted houses and have people jumping out behind plexiglass at me through all these different ones I went to. But even when we went to Haunting on Hill House, they had the tall guy that reached out and he almost like grabbed my face, and it scared me to death. But then I turned around and I was laughing. I was like, that was so cool. Why do you think that we really like enjoy stuff like that, like watching movies and getting scared and then going to haunted houses this time of year? Why do you think that is?
That's a really good question, because I react very differently when I'm in haunted houses. I actually went to one time and that was it. I think that should explain the story for
You'll go to Horror Nights with me next year.
One time. I don't do well in very small rooms or spaces where I have a very difficult time seeing surroundings, where the unexpected could happen at any given moment. And I think the other part is like the unexpected is not necessarily something that I'm looking forward to, but it's like, holy shit, I don't know what direction it's coming from. So that I don't do well in those situations. But to answer your question, why is it like that? I think there are two things, because I've experienced similar situations. So I think first, it's a denial. It's actually a denial of the fear, in my opinion. So whenever I get scared in certain situations, I know that I would try and laugh it off in order to make it appear like I was not afraid, even though I was truly scared. I mean, probably to a point of peeing my pants. So that's one thing, is a denial of the fear. And I think the other thing that I've learned through my experiences in situations where some of these things have happened, I've realized that it's maybe I was able to process the information quickly enough to understand that, oh, okay, this is really nothing to be scared of.
Mhm.
Now, what I also find interesting is that in situations where it's not set up to scare you, like for example, when Scott was sharing that story of walking through Central Park and he saw the guy and all of a sudden he saw a bunch of rats run from him. Okay, that's not like a planned activity. So
Yes, you should say that again.
Well, we hope not.
I highly doubt that you were walking through Central Park, Scott, and then you were scared, and the next thing you turned around and you laughed it off. Like
That's true.
You probably carried that fear with you from the beginning until you got to, your apartment. I was going to reveal the street of your apartment, but you never know who might show up, and so to keep your tenses down and not be scared, I won't reveal the address. But that's what I've learned, is that I think in planned situations, it's almost like a denial of the fear that I've experienced. Especially when you're in a group and when you're surrounded by many people who are your friends. I mean, at a younger age, do you really want to be seen as that kid who's scared
No.
of the dark?
I don't know.
Pees his pants when he sees Freddy or
As-
some of those things.
As boys, obviously that's taboo,
Yeah.
but
Me
I
too.
actually would be curious from Kim as to whether girls have that sort of thing. So sometimes it can be fun to be the agent of fear, I will admit. I will confess this story and be judged accordingly. I think I can accept the sentence that the world will put down on me. So I was a camp counselor once during a younger era of my life.
Oh boy.
You're dead.
And I'm canceled already. And so there was a boys' floor and a girls' floor. And the boys, this particular night, we told them to go to bed and they all went to bed. Or if they were not asleep, they were just in their rooms quietly giggling or doing whatever they did. But the girls tried to sneak, once lights were out, into one of the other rooms, thinking the counselors didn't know. And so they got in there and they were kikiing with each other and telling each other stories and doing their hair and all this. And so me and a couple of the other camp counselors were listening outside the door to hear what they were talking about. And we heard they were telling ghost stories. And so I couldn't help myself. And they had their lights on inside. So I opened up the door and I stuck my hand in and I turned the light switch on and off. And they all went screaming and they ran back into their rooms. And then I heard one of them say, the hand, it was green and it was scaly. It had huge claws.
Oh boy.
Now, I wonder if they enjoyed being afraid. I think that they were more like Kim. I don't think Kim said earlier she's not a fan of being scared, and I know that they were mad at me for a while. Once someone said, I think that was Scott.
Were you fired as a camp counselor after that?
Are you kidding?
Jason
People love me. Right. I died. I was executed. I was put under the guillotine. What I am now is just a zombie. Have you all ever been the scary person?
Oh, yes. A lot of people are afraid of clowns. Definitely afraid of clowns. And Scott, you could probably respect this movie, Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
I love that.
Well, my wife and I, when we got to Spangdahlem, we first year there in Arizona, I was dressing up as a clown and had this little fun house in my garage for Halloween, and it was a hot spot, but everybody, you really found out that was a fear. When we got to Spangdahlem, we dressed up as Killer Clowns from Outer Space for like a trunk or treat. And I would see even like my squadron leadership, who these military leaders, just got to put on that front of bravery for everybody, seeing them come through the line and put their kids in front of them because of their fear of clowns was amusing for me. And I loved it. I would have been that person because, the bullies, the ones that have sex, they're the ones that get killed. I would have been killed, but I enjoyed it because, I love that. I love seeing that raw emotion from people when you can scare somebody and you can see, their brain doesn't know and it goes to fight or flight, the amygdala. And I love seeing it. And, then they get away, they get about 30 yards from you and then it flips back off and then they say some vulgar comments to you and then take off and you see them on work on Monday. But I loved it. I loved it. I was that person.
I still am that person to a degree. I love to scare people, especially in the most unexpected circumstances. So I remember I had this phase, probably still do. Like I would be walking next to someone, and I would walk ahead of them. I'll tell them, "Hey, I'll meet you there," but really, I'm just going like a block ahead and just hiding behind the building or behind a door. And I think for me, what I truly enjoy about that time is the variety of reactions I receive. I've literally seen probably everything you could see on the face of the earth. Like I've seen people go full blown into cuss mode. They'll call me every name in the book really, really fast. And then they recognize that it's me and they're like, oh, and then just, we just move on. I've seen people just completely like jump back. I have seen maybe once or twice person actually pee their pants. Yeah.
How many times have you done this, Oleg?
I don't know. Lost track after a while. But I find it fascinating. And, it has happened to me many times as well. I've been on the receiving end of it. And I think there's something really interesting about that. And I also find it interesting, and I don't know if the two of you or Kim or Gabe or anyone else can relate to this, but do you ever find yourself, let's say, like watching a movie and you know exactly what's going to happen because you've seen that film 20 times and you still get scared by the same exact theme?
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, how does that happen? Is it because every time I'm watching it, the thing that I focus on is not the same exact thing? And therefore, when this thing repeats itself, or is it because the anticipation of it happening is so great that somehow it just triggers something within my memory that it's almost like out of my control that, okay, I know that this person is going to get killed by a shark because I've seen this scene so many times, and yet I'm still sitting there like, holding on to the seats and like, okay, no, don't do it. Like, don't do it,
Right. You don't need to skinny dip tonight, Chrissy, whatever her name was. So Kim raises an interesting point that we've touched on, but I think it's worth going back to. And it's not that she hates clowns, although that is an interesting point. And I don't hate clowns, but a lot of people do. So I'm glad you and Trip can bond over that. Kim, don't ever watch American Horror Story. But Kim says, look, she doesn't really like horror. She'll use it as clickbait for, cute guide if she needs to. But she also says that she likes to look at the humor and she's more of a comedy fan. And that reminds me, though, of a time, and maybe someone touched on it earlier, when I first saw Jurassic Park, when it first came out. And I saw it on the big screen. And of course, at the time, it was revolutionary in terms of technology. And there's the scene where the Tyrannosaurus Rex is chasing the Jeep. And I remember at that time, everyone in the audience, including me, was screaming out loud. It was terrifying, but I was laughing at the same time because it was weird. My mind, on some level, must have been divided. I was, on the one hand, terrified. On the other hand, I knew how ridiculous it was because I was laughing at the exact same time. That was just so ludicrous. And it seemed, and maybe, I don't know. So I'm curious to know as to whether that sort of thing has a different sort of feel for you, Kim. Like the Scream movies have some things like that where they are humorous. You're screaming, but you're also sort of laughing because it's so bizarre. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series, had that element too, where sometimes these things that were supposedly horrible were horrible, but they were also had this absurdist quality to them.
I think for me, if I watch something, and like my daughter right now, she's 13, we will drive my wife crazy watching a movie because we turn it into like comedy hour, especially like a horror movie. And if it's something like, you know, Halloween series or the Nightmares, I think for me, if it seems like irrational, it's hard for me to really take it serious if I've seen it before. So we do kind of laugh it off. But if I'm sitting there watching something that I feel like is like could happen, like someone could be standing outside of my house. Yeah, things like that. I don't joke about those. Yes, because I'm like, no karma. I'm laughing at this woman being killed right here. But no, I think for me, if I feel like it's just real, like that is something that could absolutely happen, I treat it a little bit more serious than I do if I'm watching, you know, like I said, like Evil Dead or something like that. We'll sit there and laugh about that. And Scott, we were talking about sleepaway camp. You were talking about being a camp counselor. Hopefully it wasn't at sleepaway camp.
No, it wasn't, thank goodness.
But we'll watch that, and we have friends over to watch sleepaway camp, and it's just we laugh the whole time until the very end. But yeah, I mean Kim's comment here.
But at what point do these fears truly become irrational? Like, and I guess it's hard to even break down like what is irrational fear, you know, to begin with, and like at what point do these fears that are quote unquote unrealistic due to a set of circumstances that you may or may not have experienced are just truly things that like not to be feared of?
Well, it goes as to a couple of things. There are scientific studies out there that have been amply commented upon around how poor the overwhelming majority of human beings are at actually making risk assessments, particularly risk assessments of things that are unlikely to happen. So, for instance, after 9/11, people all around the United States were terrified of being the victims of a terrorist attack. Now, even in New York City, with 20 million people in the metro area, 3,000 people died. I don't want to minimize 9/11. I'm a survivor of it. It was traumatic. It was bad. It was awful. However, the likelihood of you being one of the 3,000 people that died in a city that, like I said, in the metro area has like 20 million people is infinitesimally small. And all the more so if you are strutting around Boulder, Colorado or Cheyenne, Wyoming. Not that there aren't bad things that were happening there, but Al-Qaeda ain't coming. It ain't. And so there is a risk assessment. Then also there are, in my opinion, varying abilities to discern what is plausible or not. And some of that is blurred by the fact that there are, at this point, many horror movies attempt to insert some scientific or pseudoscientific language within them in order to give them a legitimacy or that sense of realism to build up the suspension of disbelief, as well as gritty filming styles. So, for instance, The Walking Dead. It had like the scientific explanation or was glossed over that it was some sort of disease that everyone got and that you died and it had these realistically well choreographed fighting scenes, and that could leave you to forget the obvious, right? All you need to do is put on a helmet and a leather jacket and you're fine. And some clothes. And this apocalypse would never happen. True. And so I think that, but it's very difficult sometimes for people to pull back. And some of it's the effectiveness, again, of the visuals and the writing, but it goes as to deficiencies in our thinking skills that these movies are exploiting. Look at the big picture. It ain't gonna happen, right? Is this truly realistic?
Yeah.
as well as maybe playing on our narcissism, sort of like what you're saying. I'm not saying narcissism is always bad, by the way. We all have to have a healthy ego. We won't want to do anything. But this belief that I'm going to be next is always because on some level or another, we have a narcissistic component to our personality. Of course you think it's going to be you.
So,
Trip? Oh, Oleg? Whoever?
This brings an interesting question though. What's the movie that was compared to COVID-19 right before COVID became a thing? Was it a movie called Outbreak? Am I right?
Oh, well, right. Yeah. It was about Ebola, or kind of like an Ebola copy. Yes.
Yeah. Something
with Matt
like that.
Damon, I think, or something like that.
So it really gets me curious though, with something like that, like COVID-19. What would you say? And I don't know, this might be putting one or both of you on the hot seat here. So if you don't feel like answering, please don't. But what would you say are rational and irrational fears when it comes to that? When it comes to the COVID-19 situation that we're experiencing or have experienced to a degree as well?
I think a lot of the fear with COVID comes from uncertainty. It comes from not knowing. I mean, I see it right now with the vaccinations, and not to, because I know it's a very sensitive topic with a lot of people, but I mean, I see it even when, it was, a mandate for us to get vaccinated. A lot of people are very against it because of just uncertainty, the unknown. They feel like they're not being told the entire truth. And someone had mentioned non-military. So I don't want anybody listening to think that I'm diming out like a clinic somewhere. But someone had said they went to a doctor, and they were about to get their vaccination. They were filling out a form that said, "Would you like to speak to a physician?" And they filled out yes, and they weren't allowed to talk to a physician. And they said that kind of raised some eyebrows with them, to where they were, a little bit more uncertain. And I think when it comes to COVID, I think especially when it first kicked off, I think we were not as well educated as we would have liked to have been as a society, because I mean, even people walking by, breathing near anybody, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it, which, I kind of equate it back to when AIDS first became like a big thing. What was some of the huge misconceptions? If I use a toilet seat, if I drink from a water fountain, I think we had a lot of that, just uncertainty. We were uneducated on it, and not a fault of our own, but maybe some of the information that was being put out there. So I think until, with a lot of things, and if you go all the way back, from beginning of time, the more educated we become, the less fearful we are.
So what defines a rational from an irrational fear then? Is it the amount of information that's available to you?
I think that helps with the rational piece, to where it's like, okay, now I understand this a little bit more. But I think when it's the things like the water fountain and the, I picked up this pen that somebody else picked up, it could be viewed as irrational. But I actually had a really good conversation about irrational versus rational yesterday with Caleb Pearson. On tomorrow's episode of Off the Air. But we were talking about that, and what one person sees as irrational, someone else sees as rational to them, because it's their truth at that moment in time.
Yeah, but some of that's crap, I've got to say, because we've gone too far as a society, I believe, in honoring everyone's truth, even if it's irrational. Some things are just irrational. And it may be your truth. I understand there are shades of gray, but some of them are really.
And social media doesn't help.
No, because it creates the illusion of, right, other people think as you do, and so people as a heuristic think, well, if other people think it, then it must be rational. No.
True.
All right. It means that there are other people that are just as irrational as you.
Yeah.
It raises something that Kim is talking about here, which is this idea of, it always happens in these horror movies, right? Exactly what Kim's describing. There's noises in a house that everyone knows is haunted. So the vulnerable, of course, beautiful blonde woman alone, even though she
deserves to die.
Right. She deserves to die. And that's an interesting question, and something that comes up when we have discussions around fears and irrationality. You hear that. Well, so-and-so is so stupid
They deserve to die.
They deserve to die, or their beliefs are so ridiculous that they deserve to die. And I will be the first to say, sometimes in these movies in particular, I am like, well, good, you deserved it.
You got what's coming to you.
Well, you got what's coming to you. But you know, the movies are playing on emotions, and you do not usually think it can be the whole suspension of disbelief is a suspension really of rationality, whereas the rational part of me or the humane part of me is like, just because you did something that is irrational or stupid doesn't mean you deserve death all the time. No, it really means you never deserve death, because as smart as anyone thinks they are, you're stupid to someone else. I like to think I've got something approaching a halfway decent sized brain, but to many Mensa members out there, I've got the intellectual capacity of an ant. And so I'm sure a lot of times, all sorts of ridiculous things that I've done to myself in my life, they're like, yeah, Scott, you had it coming. That's what you get for being such an idiot. Where I want to have compassion on myself and say, yeah, I might be an idiot, but that doesn't mean I deserved to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say, Scott, that just based on what you just shared, is that an irrational fear that you experience, as far as, okay, here's a group of people that may view me in X, Y, and Z way? Or like, how do you process that, and how does that connect to this concept of being scared or fear in general?
To the extent that there are people that think I'm stupid and doing things that cause me to die, I would want compassion at the end. That being said, the harshest judge of someone, in my case, and I know many people aren't this way, of someone for being silly is myself. So, as I've shared with you all, I wear sunscreen everywhere I go because I've had a issue, and you know, I've had some moles that have had to be removed. I don't like it. I had a mole removed in my foot. That hurt for a long time.
I still haven't developed that habit.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where, you know, I'm not going to judge anyone else, but after having that mole removed, if I wasn't wearing sunscreen everywhere I go, there may be people that would say, Scott, you're being an idiot. And that might be an idiotic thing for me to do, viewed objectively or viewed from the perspective of someone who's smarter or more, has better judgment than me. But the realistic thing is that some people have good judgment, they just choose not to use it.
Yeah.
Others just don't have good judgment. That's not their fault. They weren't born with it. Or they just don't have intellectual capacity. I'm, as I tell people all the time, blown away by the limits of my own intellect and by my own knowledge. I can't believe it sometimes. And so I feel like, would I want to be judged for that? Now, it's interesting. I'm half Black. And when I was told that I had to have a mole removed, I was very surprised. And I told the woman at the dermatologist's office, I said, me? I'm half Black. Like, this doesn't happen to those of us with all this beautiful melanin in our lives. And she very politely said, Scott, tell that to Bob Marley, who died from skin cancer. And so, like, I really wasn't being rational. I really was not paying attention to facts. I was exempting myself due to my own narcissistic belief that this thing just wouldn't happen to me because of something that was completely ridiculous. But if that mole had been cancerous, would I have wanted sympathy? Or if I don't know, having mercy on people, if we don't know whether they've had the capacity to make good decisions, is, to me, the fairest thing to do. Jessica, it's good to see you. We love you. We've missed you. We're talking about what makes you scared. And Jessica, if you have a favorite horror movie, or there's a time you've screamed at a movie really loud, put it in the comments. We want to know about it.
One thing I want to ask y'all was, we're talking about like rational versus irrational, and Scott was talking about, you know, like getting in your head with stuff, is something that majority of Americans fear is public speaking, getting up in front of large groups. And when you think about it, you're like, what in the world's the worst thing? Like, if you really thinking about it rationally, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I get up there, fumble over some words. Everybody plays to my ego and I'm done. And they're like, oh, you did great, even though you didn't. But in our heads, we build up this narrative of I'm going to get up there and give this speech, and it's going to be so bad that everybody's going to stand up and start throwing dinner rolls at me and boo me out of the place, and they're going to have the little stick pull me. Why do you think something like public speaking is something that majority of people are just absolutely terrified of and have this rational, irrational fear, however you want to label it?
Well, first of all, Bodhi, I don't think you've been on the right stages, because those things I have seen happen. The dinner plates thrown at me. I'm kidding. No, I've never
the Muppets. That happens with the Muppets.
I've never experienced that. I think for me, the only reason why I can share this is because this is something that I've experienced throughout my own life, and that is there were chapters within my life where I was afraid of public speaking. And what I've been able to understand from that experience is that the reason why I was afraid of it is because I put such a great emphasis on what other people thought of me before I thought of myself. So my image was entirely dependent on the external presence and not the internal one. So I chose to build my own personality. I chose to build my own what I can and can't do in this world around what other people thought I should be doing. And when I didn't check those boxes, I didn't feel like I would fit in. I didn't feel like I was a part of a community. I didn't feel like I could belong to certain places or certain groups. So was it the greatest fear? At a certain point, yes. It was a greater fear than the irrational fear that I experience still on a daily basis, and that's spiders. I don't get it. But I see a spider of any size. I mean, I'm talking like a spider that's, like you could barely even see it with a microscope. I'm still afraid of it. I'm still afraid of that spider somehow getting onto me and biting me, and somehow that's leading to death or whatever it is, which could be true with some spiders for sure. But at the same time, it also brings up another point, and that's I don't think anything is too small to make a difference. And the only reason why I say that is because try sleeping with a mosquito and waking up with like 10 mosquito bites, and it's like, geez, So I think going back to your point, Bodhi, and I know, Scott, you have stories of your own when it comes to this as well, but it's that fear came from my desire to seek external validation, and knowing that if I were to mess up on a public presence, especially when it involved a group of people who I looked up to for the formation of my inner world, and if I didn't meet, or if I didn't gain approval from them, then my world was going to be shattered. Yeah. And if we're being honest, who wants to live in a broken world, especially a broken internal world? Probably not very many people. So those were my things that took me a while to work through, and two of you know this better than anyone else, and Jessica and Kim. Sometimes it takes time to build your inner world and know that you are the architect and the painter and the plumber and every author and whatever role. But initially I was terrified of it. And I think it's hard to say, was that an irrational fear or was that a rational fear because my image so much depended on it?
Jessica, hello. Silence of the Lambs. That I kind of get you. That was more of.
Didn't make sense.
Yeah, to me, it didn't scare me, but it was intense. I will admit, at the end, when the woman who was sort of kept down in the well came out and she had that little dog in her arms, I'm sorry. As much as I'm a dog lover, I would have been like, get this dog away from me.
Was that the one where the reporter was set on fire on the chair? Or was that Red Dragon?
I think that was Red Dragon. Yeah. And then I think in one of the sequels, someone was alive while Hannibal Lecter was eating his brain and live and conscious, that was fascinating. Yeah. And so, but in any event, and then Jessica also mentions The Shining, which to me, that's an interesting case because ostensibly that was a horror movie. I didn't see anything scary at all about it. It was a psychologically intense movie and it was suspenseful, but it also goes as to me various and I'm not disagreeing with you about your choice or diminishing it at all, Jessica. It goes as to what makes something scary or not. Things like the Sixth Sense, Silence of the Lambs, even Jaws, and The Shining, to me, are suspense movie with supernatural or horrific elements. But I know a lot of people experience them as horror movies. 12 Years a Slave is, as a genre matter, ostensibly a historical drama or a biopic. But actually, to me, that was genuinely a horror movie because the director really used horror movie tropes to illustrate a historical point. And the events that happened in that, many of them were true horror events in a way that even things like Silence of the Lambs weren't. Another interesting case for anyone who's seen it is The Fly, which to me is not a horror movie, but it has horror elements. There's a horror of what happens to a diseased human body, which goes back to sort of what we were talking about earlier around irrational fears concerning AIDS or COVID or things like that. Public speaking, Kim raises that she's afraid that they won't laugh at her jokes. And I interviewed, I'm the host of a Toastmasters podcast. Toastmasters, as everyone should know, exists to help people, among other things, with glossophobia or the fear of public speaking. And the guest on the episode that I taped last night is a professional comedian who actually has appeared on this show. What'd you say?
Is that what public speaking is called? Fear of
the
public
fear
speaking?
of it is, yes.
Glossophobia?
Yep.
Never known that.
And in any event, this comedian mentioned exactly in passing what you were talking about, Kim. He went into a lot of detail about times where he bombed and what that was like. That is, interestingly, it is true. Like people say, fear of public speaking is greater than that of death. Even
Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah, even though no one, as someone else famous, I just can't remember who, said, no one has ever died from public speaking.
Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld said more people would rather be in the grave than reading the eulogy.
Yeah.
When it comes to public speaking. I actually had speaking nearly like derailed my career because I got asked to be an instructor. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting on here talking to two of you if I didn't conquer that fear. But I had one of the worst public speaking experiences known to man. I actually make joke about it now when I'm talking to my class, because now I teach people how to become proficient public speakers. And I got up in front of a large crowd and I was reading something, and my voice was cracking and my throat got dry and it was terrible. I turned down hosting someone's retirement ceremony because I was so afraid to get up and speak in front of people again. And I got offered the job that I teach now as an instructor, and I almost turned down the job because I was afraid of public speaking. And it really took me having to face it head on. And what's the saying? Fear is opportunity in disguise. Something along those. I probably went Tim Taylor and butchered that up, but I really believe that. I believe that if we can conquer a lot of our fears, I believe there's so many opportunities, so many chances for us on the other side of that.
Well, if I could just point out, Kim made a great comment about how she handles making errors in public speaking by just pretending the errors were on purpose.
Yeah,
it's kind of genius, Kim. I love it. Oleg.
You know, one thing that I've kind of learned through my own journey of public speaking for however long is that many of these things that are nerves and emotions and everything, they don't actually go away. They transform, they take a different shape. For me, I can only speak from my perspective and experience, but that is a big myth that I was able to work through, and that is when I was first starting off. And a lot of people would say, oh, don't worry about it. Like, you won't feel this way. And, you know, by the time you do your 10th or 100th or whatever engagement, and you're not going to feel the nerves and the hands will stop shaking. I didn't have that experience. I still experience those things. I think for me, what has changed now is I've added a lot more tools to my arsenal. So now I know that, okay, when the hands start shaking or when the stomach starts churning or when I feel like I start to forget some of my natural thoughts or words, I get to some of these things like breathing. I mean, this is something that I don't know, however many years it took me to discover, but like there's a serious power behind learning how to breathe.
Oh yeah.
And not necessarily like specific breathwork techniques, although I think they work terrifically, but more so just understanding how to inhale and then how to exhale and then how to repeat that like 2 or 3 more times. And so that's the first thing that I realized. But the other thing that I find fascinating is I think there's also a different level of fear within that experience because I'll tell you this: when I've been part of networking events, for example, and you know when you're going to be called, BNI is a perfect example. Scott and I shared this in common. You know when you're going to be called to do your 1 minute, 2 minute
Yes,
pitch,
your little commercial.
you know exactly when your turn is up.
Yeah.
So internally, there's that clock that starts ticking. Like, oh,
Heart
okay,
starts beating.
yeah, I'm fifth person, I'm fourth, I'm third in line, I'm second, and now it's me. I don't know why, but before those presentations would start, we would have the brief like intro and connect with other people and blah blah blah. I didn't experience any of those feelings. I was perfectly in the moment. I'm like, I can chit chat with anyone about anything. As soon as the clock started to tick, I'm literally finding myself turning off the mute, turning the video, sitting there breathing, going to get water. And then I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, how crazy is that? That 5 minutes ago, I didn't experience any of this. And then as soon as I was given the cue, like you're the 10th in line, my whole world changed. Like that to me is fascinating. Also, there's something to be when you know how close you are, the fear actually intensifies even more versus maybe being picked out of the crowd that, okay, this person finished, Scott, you're next. Bodhi, you're next. Oleg, you're next. Like those are all like very different levels of fear that I've experienced.
I saw it in our course today. We had our instructors actually teach back to us, and they had their list written on the board as to who was teaching when. And I would see the one who was coming up next, and the person ahead of them starting to close out their lesson, and you could see the next person like starting to get all their stuff straight, and you can see their breathing changing. And 10 minutes before that, they were laughing and joking and having a good time, engaged in conversation. But I turned to someone today, and we told them we were going to take lunch, and I turned to them and I said, "Hey, you're the last person. Let's just you can go ahead up there in 2 minutes and do yours." She just became overcome with fear just by you're next.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's that safety net. We feel like if we can prepare ourselves, if we can get that safety net set up, I think we're good to go. But I think when someone kind of takes that from us, and we will find every reason. I mean, even when she finished, she did phenomenal. She did great. But when she got done, she's like, "Oh, that did not go as good as I wanted." And now I was just told at the last minute that I had to get up there. Like we tried to, throw that out there, but she did phenomenal. But yeah, I think we like that safety net. We like to kind of, it is a control thing, I think, too. We like to be in control, start when we want. Yeah, comfort.
Jessica raises some interesting points. She raises, related to what you two mentioned a few minutes ago, rejection, and the fear of that is part of what's behind the fear of public speaking, because heaven knows, as you mentioned, with the dinner plates and the biscuits and stuff coming at you, it can be, rejection can be very visible.
Yeah.
And then she also talks about how she sometimes, when she might be giving a show, she doesn't even realize perhaps that she's scared, but then she looks at her Fitbit afterwards and realizes her heart rate has gone through the roof. I wonder if that's the case with me. I don't measure my heart rate like that. I do feel after most shows very drained for a significant period of time. I can't just, for instance, be done with this show and immediately get back to the keyboard and start typing away at business. It just doesn't happen. And so that may relate to, although I don't, I'm trying to even think, do I feel nervous at this point doing a podcast episode, particularly a live one? I consciously don't, but maybe I do. I do want to do a good job. I'm not sitting here thinking, well, if I make a complete jerk of myself or a complete idiot of myself, it won't matter. A conscious part of me says, oh, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'll fall on my face and dust myself off. But I still would prefer it not to happen. It's still, I'm never confident that no matter what I do, I won't somehow become an object of ridicule and shame. That both wearing a scarlet letter of some sort, and you all cast me out in the woods to be eaten by a monster.
Do you think it's a level of comfort? But like, if for me, if I know I'm hopping on here and talking to y'all about like fear or something like that, I know I can hop on here. I'm like, I can at least hold my own. But if you tell me that we're talking about like fusion of atoms, I would probably be fearful hopping on here, knowing I had to talk to y'all for an hour and a half about that. Do y'all think that plays into it? Just the knowledge and the comfort that you have to the topic that you're discussing?
I think
Oh, go ahead, Oleg.
I think familiarity plays a huge role in this. And Scott, I don't know if you can relate to this as well, but as you were sharing this, it made me think of the times where, you would have to do the back end sometimes for setting up for the show. And you have to, click this slide and that slide and this video, then add these people. And then I wonder, do you experience fear in that moment when you do things like that? And so I noticed for me, it's familiarity plays a huge role. If I'm not familiar with the setting and the environment and the, I think it used to be the group. Now I don't really, don't care is not the right terminology, because I think at the core I still care. In my opinion, I don't think it's ever possible not to care about what anyone thinks. I think if anything, like there are elements of it that I choose to care, and then there are elements of it that I choose to, I filter it. I filter it out, like I process it differently. But I think being familiar with whatever it is that I'm in, it plays a big role. It determines how much of a fear I experience in that moment.
Well, going back, though, to Jessica's original point about the fear of rejection, interestingly enough, when I've had technological snafus, I kind of don't care. I care because I want to present professionally, but I don't feel fear about that because, in my opinion, the point Jessica made about rejected, people, in my experience, don't generally judge you negatively for technological snafus. Either they themselves can empathize with it, or it's just part of living in the virtual world that we've lived in. Even as far as we've come with Zoom and StreamYard and all these Riverside, these other platforms, they always somehow manage to make it more difficult than it needs to be. And there are always weird freezes or buttons that don't work or this, that, and the other. And folks just sort of roll with it. The knowledge. Sometimes familiarity with a subject matter does give me confidence. However, I will say, and I believe, who said it? Jessica mentioned the concern about being shown up by someone who knows what they're talking about when you're sitting up there talking about something you have no idea about. I'm a little bit more like Kim, who just likes to be out there talking. I'll just say it. Now, I will, though, try and protect myself. So my ego is somewhat at play here, because I'll generally say something like, oh, I know I'm not an expert on this, or I don't know what I'm talking about, but here's what I'm going to say anyway.
Oh, boy.
That's sort of violating the other thing that Oleg, you and I have talked about, which is sometimes shutting your mouth and not offering.
Stay in your lane.
Right.
Yes.
I don't need to offer my opinion on chemistry, but I do anyway. Sometimes I don't. So I don't know that I'm afraid of it. If I put it out there that I don't know what I'm talking about and you still choose to believe me, well, then we're back in our discussion about being irrational. That being said, it goes as just something else, which is a power that some people have, or more to more or less degree. I used to work at the store in Topeka, Kansas called Macy's. And the people there, I thought sometimes were, well, I like to play little games. I was a teenager. And I told some people that were co-workers there that my actual name was Ntanku Shabalon, and that I was born in Lebanon, and that my parents, shortly after my birth, had been in an explosion. I was tossed in the air during this bomb and landed in a trash can. And I laid there.
What?
And I laid there for a while until I was picked up and put into an orphanage in Lebanon. And then eventually they gave me to my parents, who brought me to America, and they smuggled me. And I had this whole elaborate story. And therefore, I was an expert on all of these things related to adoption and immigration and oppression in the Middle East. And they believed me. They totally believed me. And then when I said I'm bullshitting, they were mad.
Yeah.
They were mad. They're like, we trusted you. We believed in you.
Yeah.
And at that point, I said to myself, I need to really watch what I'm saying. Because I don't want to, you don't want to be misleading people when really you're obviously just trying to tell us all tale. I've never done that on this show, by the way, and that's the truth.
If they believed you all the way up until the explosion piece, you got me. If they believed you after the explosion piece, shame on them.
Yeah.
I read a novel called I Was a White Slave in Harlem. And it was about a British aristocrat who was allegedly her autobiography, whose estate in Singapore burned down during the end of colonialism. And so he ended up in Brooklyn somehow, was teaching in the schools before in the bad old New York City days, got shot at, and decided to go undercover and live the rest of his life as a woman. And he was only on a teacher's salary. So he was sneaking into these high society clubs and stealing furs. And he was, one of the furs that he got, he wrapped in, and the woman whose fur it was saw him wearing it, and he ran to escape and not get caught, and jumped out a window and landed in a trash dumpster on his or her heels and managed to escape with her fur. And I will say, the story might have had me going till she jumped out of the window and landed in the trash dumpster on her heels.
Wow. That's an experience. That's a little bit of
Have I silenced you?
No, I was enjoying the story. I'm very much a visual person, so I'm sitting here picturing this.
It's a little bit of a harder experience to process here.
Yeah.
At 1:33 a.m. in the morning.
So Kim had an interesting comment about when she is interviewing people on her podcast that she just has met through TikTok. And then she can't wait to meet them. And I get that way too. Although there is a part of me that feels fear sometimes with that too. Thinking this person that I met from my podcast who seemed totally rational and awesome and incredible, like, what if I meet them and they're absolutely bonkers? Yeah. They just held it together for the hour long that I was interviewing them.
It's funny though, because even yesterday, so I did an interview yesterday, and I was logging in, and it was with, we're talking about horror, D. Wallace, and I know Jessica has interviewed D. Wallace as well. If you would have told me even pre-COVID that I would be logging in to interview D. Wallace or a one-on-one interview, I would have told you I'd been nervous as hell, but I logged in really, really comfortable. But then I logged in today with a friend of mine who I haven't seen in about 2-3 years to do a podcast interview with. I found myself more nervous logging in with that individual.
Interesting. Why?
Than I was with her. And I this whole, just recently after reading hers, in the middle of that and the person still in furs jumping in the dumpster story, I was processing it and I was like, why is that? And I don't know if it's just because I feel like that person that I know expects more. If I get on there with D. Wallace and it just doesn't go well, then she ain't gonna remember me anyways. But I think with that individual that I know, we have a relationship, and that individual I don't know. I don't. What do y'all think that is? Like, y'all play doctor to me here. Why do y'all think that was a fear I have?
That actually is a good question. Maybe because you care more about your friend than you do D. Wallace.
Yeah.
Maybe their respect means more to you than D. Wallace. Like D. Wallace is as awesome as she is and easy to talk to, as Jessica points out. Not that I know personally, but I have no reason to believe that isn't true. Why you're still probably unlikely to develop a lifelong bond with her.
Yeah, she's not talking about me with Spielberg or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe she will.
Maybe.
Hey, you never know. And I have a question, by the way. Jessica and Kim, if you had to jump out of a window in your heels into a dumpster, would you be able to land on your heels?
Wow. I have one thing that you guys brought up is when it comes to presentations or podcasts or whatever it is, do you ever experience fear for not being able or for forgetting certain things? So, for example, like in this case, forgetting to show the animation of the t-shirts, or in your case of the trainings, Bodhi, like forgetting a particular slide, a slide that could literally be a pivotal one to presentations. Like, do you guys ever experience fears like that?
For me, and I thought it was like the segue to the shirts. But yeah, I like the transition. For me, I'm kind of with Scott on the slides or anything like that. That stuff, for the most part, does not fear me. I think the thing that I fear is that, and it's not really a fear, but I might forget something and then look back at it and wish that I would have said something, or I would have asked a certain question. I think that's probably the fear because I'm pretty well prepared. Kind of what Kim says there, always prepared. Well, not with the windows and heels, but I'm never prepared for that. But logging in for a podcast or anything like that, I'm always prepared with anything I need on there. I haven't had it happen yet, but I think it's just that fear of forgetting something.
I've forgotten stuff, but I'm just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do another episode.
Exactly. Yeah. Or it wasn't that important, or the flow of the conversation. I interviewed a guest today where I had prepared, a whole range of interesting questions, and he was so smart, and the conversation just went in so many unusual, non-linear directions that I threw up my hands inside, and I feel the conversation was better for it because it was more natural, and it went in unexpected directions, and I thought would be more compelling than if I had just said, "Oh, I better not forget this question," and then just went to it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, while we remember, should we show people the shirts?
I would love that. I'm scared of what they might think, though. Kim and Jessica, it is awesome. Kim and Jessica, I know I owe you both DMs about these t-shirts, so thank you for reaching out to me about them. And Jessica, I fear falling like that squirrel did as well. Spectrum Designs, just so anyone who's watching this or listening to it knows, is an amazing t-shirt company that employs almost exclusively people that are on the autistic spectrum, about 90% of which never get jobs at all. And the jobs that Spectrum provides are real career path oriented jobs, not just make work, not just nonprofit industrial complex sort of jobs, but real jobs meeting real consumer needs. And the organization is run as a business. So you're really contributing to something amazing when you order custom or contract t-shirts, hoodies, gym bags, baseball hats, or whatever from them. Now, and yes, I'm glad you love Spectrum, Jessica. They deserve every bit of love they get. One thing that I would be scared of is my fate if I were to not ask my two homeboys here where people can find out more about them. So Oleg, I'll start with you. Where can people find out more about you, and what are they going to find when they start looking?
They'll find a lot of great things to be afraid of. No, I'm kidding. I would say the ultimate place where people can find me is through Overcoming Odds, and as many people know, I've embarked on a year-long journey, possibly a little shorter, maybe a little bit longer than that, around the world. And so I'm spending some time in Portugal right now in a hostel. And that's one of the reasons why, you're able to see the ever-changing backgrounds from one week to another. But I would say Overcoming Odds is the place where people can find a variety of stories of people who have overcome hardships in their lives and have continued to develop tools and skills within their life sets to face whatever that's ahead of them. And I think that's the biggest thing that I choose to believe in. And I know that even through this travel, I've learned a lot as far as different ways to embrace change, to see the uncertainty, to face the unknown. And Scott, you were right in so many different ways before I left, and that's one of them. In regard to connections, Scott made a comment to me when I was leaving, and he said that you will meet many people, but you may also experience tremendous loss. And I think going back to this topic of being scared, I've noticed that as part of this journey, I was scared of the loss. I was scared of losing some of these deeper connections that I make within as short as 24 hours. And I did make many of those by staying in different hostels. And I've learned that this is the next chapter of my life that I'm embarking on, processing detachment from attachment, and then just trying to figure out how do I continue to develop some of these meaningful relationships and preserve them from one time to another, which I know Bodhi does a really good job through his podcast talk about the shadows. And that's the shadow that I'm faced with right now, and that's the shadow of the past that's probably triggering some of these thoughts and feelings about loss and perceiving some of these relationships that I may not experience as a loss and not necessarily as an opportunity to learn something I may or may not have known before.
Yeah, and I currently have The Shadows Podcast, theshadowspodcast.com. Very easy to remember. On Instagram, _Shadows Podcast. And we've been doing this 31 Days of Halloween. I know Scott's been giving me some love on that, but we've been doing all these movies we've been talking about on here today. We've been doing mock-up posters. Yeah. We just had Leatherface yesterday. I have a special one coming tonight that will be posted later on. But this week we're going to have Halloween week, where tomorrow we're dropping our YouTube exclusive Off the Air, where the host of the Ignite podcast, Caleb Pearson, he and I talk about fear. And kind of similar to some of the stuff we talked about here today. But then on Saturday, the Scott Mason is going to be the guest on Off the Air, or excuse me, Rise from the Shadows. I'm totally butchering all my names here. So I was afraid of this. And then on Sunday, our Halloween episode, The Chronicles of Dee Wallace. The Scream Queen herself is going to be our guest on our Halloween episode. But our concept is simple. Ordinary people with extraordinary stories, and they share, we all believe we believe we don't have a story to tell. We're not special, but every single one of us have those superhero moments and powers within us that we let loose. And we're we can amaze ourselves with what we can accomplish. We've had authors, CEOs, athletes, you name it, military members get on there and share their stories. And we're excited for where we're going with this. But Scott, I know you are doing some amazing things as well. So tell everybody about what all you're doing.
Yeah. So my podcast is Scott Mason's Purpose Highway. Right now, it is exploring the era of profound transition that we are living in with regards to how people connect each other through the search for spirituality, purpose, and ethical grounding. What a silent revolution in thought about those connecting institutions means for our society and for us as individuals, as well as how the secret plague of alienation, that the decline of a lot of these institutions, such as organized religion, that have historically guided us through the connection for a meaningful life, what that alienation can lead to, and people who have pathways out of it. I am excited to announce, though, that sometime earlier next year, quite early next year, most likely, the podcast will be shifting themes again. A third season will begin. We'll talk more about that in the future, but for anyone who follows me on social media, you will quite quickly figure out what the general theme is going to be, and we will be discussing some of these themes in upcoming episodes of this show as well. I'd like to also say that, Kim, Hostel is my favorite movie ever.
Yeah, hopefully that doesn't happen for
Let's
me.
Don't talk about that. We got Oleg.
Yeah.
Oleg's on here.
Oleg's actually living in a hostel here, so let's not.
Bad timing.
So let's also take a second to point out that both of the actually, all three of the people that participated in the conversation tonight have their own shows. Gabe Leal, as I mentioned earlier, is the king of LinkedIn Live, and his show is absolutely fantastic, not to be missed. And boy, the production value that he puts into that, it's wonderful. Jessica, your breakthrough show, which focuses on the breakthroughs moments that people have had in their lives, and this season I believe you're still focusing on music and musicians, is powerful, and you exude such warmth and openness as a host, and it's very easy for people to talk to you and really be honest and real. Kim, your podcast, Kimology 411, you possess the true spark of life. And I love how well you've not only done with it, but how well you're doing with it, particularly on TikTok. It is amazing to be part of a community of such extraordinary people. And thank you all for being with us week after week, looking to find that nut.